Well, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Thank you for your patience. We are very pleased to have the opportunity to get going today. We have a real treat in store, we believe, for all of us, which is not just a discussion on elections in Central America and the implications for U.S. policy, but it's with somebody who actually knows about these issues and has interesting things to say about them, and who has developed a very well-earned reputation as a champion for the Americas, both in Congress and also in Washington more generally. This, of course, is Congressman Eliot Engel. My name is Eric Farnsworth. I head the Washington office of the Council of the Americas, and I am very pleased to serve as your host today. In addition to beginning my career in Central America-related issues at the State Department way back when, I won't go into how many years ago that may have been, the Council as an institution has sought to highlight and advocate for issues that are designed to improve people's lives across the Central American Isthmus, where we have taken a special interest. In fact, many of the Council's leaders over the years have had direct experience working in Central America, including our current chairman, John Negroponte, and also my immediate predecessor, the late Bill Price. We have been strong advocates through the years for democracy and the rule of law, trade expansion through CAFTA and other vehicles, cleaner energy connectivity, and enhanced personal security, to name just a few. In fact, earlier this week, we just concluded another major conference in Central America, this time in San Jose, Costa Rica, so we remain dedicated to the advancement of the region. Although other issues across Latin America may have gained more attention in the past decade, Central America continues to be an important group of nations, obviously, not just for business activities, but also for U.S. foreign and security policy interests and outcomes. And as several Central American nations prepare to go to the polls over the next 6 months, beginning November 24 with Honduras and continuing into next year with El Salvador, Costa Rica, and Panama, the regional landscape may be shifting. Additionally, Guatemalans will go to the polls in 2015, and Nicaraguans are considering constitutional changes right now that will impact their elections well into the future. At the same time, as we've heard in a number of on-the-record meetings we've held with senior government officials, including, for example, Ambassador Bill Brownfield and others, the issues of security, law enforcement, and the narcotics cartels continue to challenge democratic institutions across the region. Fundamental questions of economic opportunity and development remain. Poverty continues to prevail for far too many people across the region. Indeed, in some ways, the devastating effects of Hurricane Mitch from 1998 are still affecting the region. And as an aside, we pause a moment to recognize the very serious reconstruction effort that will have to occur in the Philippines. If we're still talking about Hurricane Mitch 15 years after it occurred, we have a serious effort underway, or will need a serious effort underway, to help the people of the Philippines recover from their recent tragic typhoon. Coupled with a growing distrust of political parties and political institutions, which have, it must be said, been unable to deliver broader economic and social progress, along with the corrosive influence of corruption by the politically and economically connected, the region faces a very important time. The question is not whether individual elections will set the region on a different course. Each nation, of course, is different. Rather, Central America is seeking a longer-term vision of development and democratic governance and a viable path to achieve and sustain it. In my view, there's an important role here for Washington, both in the immediate electoral moment as well as in coming alongside the people of Central America to work toward a broader and longer-term regional vision. Much is at stake. And that is why we are so pleased to have the opportunity today to host the ranking member on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Eliot Engel, who represents the 16th District of New York, for a discussion on the important issues facing the region. I first got to know Mr. Engel through his important work as chair and also ranking member of the Subcommittee on the Western Hemisphere, and I've admired his thoughtful contributions to, and indeed his tenacity for, matters of hemispheric importance and regional U.S. policy. Congressman Engel has an impressive record of legislative accomplishment, both in Washington and also in Albany, where he served in the State Assembly, and on both domestic and international issues. He began his career as a public school teacher, which is important to me personally because my wife is a public school teacher. We count him as a friend at the Council of the Americas, and indeed we honored him in 2009 with our Chairman's Award for Leadership in the Americas. This is a complicated period for Central America, and we are fortunate that we have leaders in Congress who are focused on these issues and able to get things done. Ladies and gentlemen, I would ask you please to join me in welcoming back to the Council of the Americas the ranking member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Mr. Eliot Engel.
Well, thank you very much, Eric, and hello, everybody. Good afternoon. I want to say something nice about Eric, not because I have to, because I want to. When I first became the chair, or first ranking member of the Western Hemisphere Subcommittee, and then for 4 years the chair, we had a number of hearings, and whenever we had Eric Farnsworth as one of our expert witnesses, he always really said it the way it was, and really feel that we learned so much from his knowledge. So I think the Council of the Americas is lucky to have him, and I'm very happy to be here. Once again, I have a lot of respect for this organization. The work I did in the 4 years I was chair of the Western Hemisphere Subcommittee, I think, is among the best work that I've done in my 25 years in Congress. We really visited many countries. We visited both sides, political opposition as well as the people who were in power, and felt that the work we did in a bipartisan fashion was very good work. Now I'm ranking member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, and I still have a great affection in my heart for Latin America and the Caribbean and the entire Western Hemisphere. So I'm very happy to be here, and I thank you for inviting me to share a few thoughts on U.S. policy towards our friends in Central America, especially as Honduras and El Salvador prepare for elections. I believe very strongly that countries in our neighborhood, Western Hemisphere is our neighborhood, are very vital. And I welcome any opportunity to contribute to a debate on how we can improve them. You know, it's frustrating for me because we seem to have so many pressing problems in so many other areas of the world that we seem to neglect our own hemisphere. I think that's true under administrations of both parties. I don't think it's true because people want it to be true. I think we just get involved with so many of the world's problems. I guess in one way it's good that we don't have the problems and difficulties in the Western Hemisphere that we may have had several years ago or many years ago, and so I guess from that point of view it's a plus. But I do think that it is so important, and we do make a mistake by not concentrating more on the hemisphere, both from a point of view that geographically we're in the hemisphere, point of view of many more Americans are hyphenated Americans coming from the region. And so I think there are ties when people come and they emigrate to the United States. There are ties with their home country, so we do have natural ties to various countries in Central America for sure, Caribbean for sure. And I think that that really helps our country. And I hope that we can readjust things so that we are really focusing the attention on our hemisphere that it really deserves. The U.S. has a long and, to use a charitable term, complicated track record in Central America. When I look back, there are things of which I'm proud, and there are things of which I'm ashamed. The region remains among the poorest in the Americas, and recently has been beset by its geographic utility to illegal drug traffickers, a problem for those countries, certainly a problem for the United States. And they move their products to the United States. While many of this region's problems are transnational, when I talk to any audience about the Americas, I make it a point to state that I believe each country is different, and conflating them usually gets us into trouble. We have to understand that. Each country is different. The upcoming elections in Honduras and a few months later in El Salvador provide us with the opportunity to shine a light on those countries and on the current state of U.S. policy toward them. I should tell you now that some of my comments will be critical. but I offer them in the spirit of friendship and bettering these relationships. Let me start with El Salvador. I take the long view. I'm very bullish on El Salvador. It's a poor country, saddled with a vast problem of income inequality and a difficult economic road ahead. Overlaid on these troubles is the very real and corrosive effect of illegal drug trafficking. Understandably, Salvadorans themselves tend to be pessimistic when talking about their own country. But another way to tell the story of today's El Salvador is to point to its incredible achievements since the monstrous civil war that was still raging barely 20 years ago. The country is very close to embarking on a second Millennium Challenge Compact, although current problems with corruption are worrisome and need to be addressed now. With its gang truce, which is held for 19 months and counting, Salvador is attempting a new way to face a long-running internal security problem. In the most recent elections, Salvadorans gave the FMLN a historic victory over the Arena party and set them on the difficult task of governing. The sky did not fall as some have predicted, and U.S. relations with El Salvador remain good. The upcoming elections are once again between the FMLN and Arena, which means the party structure is held firm. There is every reason to believe that President Funes will hand over the presidential sash to the winner, making manifest the foundations of a basic national consensus. I must tell you that I attended the inaugural of President Funes, and I'll never forget, with Hillary Clinton, who was there as well, and I thought the two of them made outstanding speeches. It was one of the highlights of all the travel I did in Central and South America. I was very proud of our country and very proud of the progress that El Salvador has made. Over this same time period, as I mentioned before, the U.S. has gained an influx of Salvadoran immigrants who today comprise a vibrant and growing part of our population. Here in Washington. They're in my home city of New York. And again, taking a long view, this is a success story, and our job as a friend of that country is to work with the Salvadoran government, whoever it may be, to build on that success. I feel very, very strongly that countries elect whom they want to, and that the United States should not take sides and should work with whatever government is duly elected by the citizens. I think that's very, very important. Now, Honduras is a little more difficult case, and U.S. policy in that context is more nettlesome. In 2009, Honduras' president was removed by the Honduran military and flown to Costa Rica, where the de facto government that took over really was not recognized internationally. Things have been difficult. I like President Pepe Lobo. I think he has tried his best, but there are very, very difficult circumstances really working against him. Security problems are legion. Organized crime is in the ascendant. Security forces are feared and resist attempts at reform, and institutions are weak or worse. And that's always a problem. We have to try to build up institutions in these different countries because when they're weak, crime and other things take over. The judiciary is utilized as a weapon to settle political scores, and journalists and human rights defenders tell me that they feel under siege. The Inter-American Commission on Human Rights has written things about these abuses since 2009 and have been echoed by virtually all the major human rights organizations. So that is really disconcerting. But I'd like to pause for a moment to express deep concern for Berta Oliva, the head of COFADE, the most important human rights organization in Honduras. Berta has been a tireless advocate for victims of human rights, and her organization has created an alarming catalog of murders, rapes, disappearances, and other human rights violations. A very thick skin is required to be a human rights defender, and Berta is usually fearless. But in the past week, we've heard the volume and nature of attacks impugning her have grown to a level that causes us to be concerned for her safety. And what triggered this was her trip last week to Washington to visit members of Congress and their staffs. I think it's important for us in Washington to hear from all sides. I've been around long enough to know that not everything is black and white. There are all kinds of shades of gray. But I think in order for us to make intelligent policy decisions, we have to listen to all voices, including dissidents in countries. So I would hope that the campaign of threats and intimidation to Berta ends and that her safety is guaranteed and the safety of her staff as well. I've laid out a stark but realistic appraisal of Honduras to make two central points. The first point is that the upcoming elections will not wave a magic wand and make all the problems go away. It would certainly make things more complicated if there is no declared clear winner in a free and fair election. The OAS Electoral Observation has maintained a presence in Honduras since May, and the OAS, NDI, the EU, and the Carter Center will together deploy a monitoring team on Election Day. Given the closeness of polls, it is distinctly possible that a clear winner might not be announced on Election Day, but will have to wait for a recount to begin days later. We're thankful for the election monitors and will look to them, especially the OAS, to manage the inevitable tensions that will arise as results are verified. When I last spoke at the OAS, I called on election monitors for all the elections that are being held. There was one particularly at that time in Venezuela and got rebuked by the Venezuelan delegate, but I think it's important that we have international inspectors there who can testify to the free and fair elections. But even in the best case, the election won't fix Honduras' problems any more than the last elections did. The problems in many ways are structural. They go to the deepest aspects of how any society organizes itself. They're about a small but powerful economic clique that has resisted creating an effective rule of law that applies to all. They're about a huge economically disenfranchised population that in the latest Latino Barometro poll is dead last in the hemisphere in believing that democracy will solve its problems. There are also crucial issues regarding Honduras' election system itself. Several of my colleagues said in a letter to Secretary Kerry a few weeks ago that there are significant doubts about whether a level electoral playing field exists for now. So we really need to make sure that there is a free and fair elections. And the problem is there is no law that provides for a second round, setting up a possible win with 30% of the vote. Exactly, in my opinion, what Honduras does not need in its quest for national consensus. It would be obviously much better if someone could get a majority of the vote. The second point is that Honduras' deeper problems are not susceptible to a military or security fix. This has tangible implications for U.S. policy, and many of these have been flagged by my colleagues in Congress. By my count, there have been about 10 congressional letters sent to the Secretary of State regarding unfolding events in Honduras. And I've been contacted by state constituents in my district worried about many of the same issues. So I want to share with you some of the overriding concerns in these letters. They revolve around an overly militarized U.S. relationship with Honduran security forces and the human rights perils that this creates with security forces that have become politicized. In frustration, many of my congressional colleagues have called for a cessation of security assistance. I'm not in that camp. I still believe that the U.S. and Honduras have an important role to play with each other and that the U.S. can be a very positive force in Honduras. And for that reason, I'm still very bullish on Honduras. But I think the U.S. has a positive role to play. But at the same time, the dangers are critical, and they're clear, and they must be addressed. Security and stability is important, but not an end in itself. A secure environment sets the groundwork to meet governance challenges for the fight against impunity and for the need to strengthen all manner of governing institutions. To win the security battle without nurturing these other things, I believe will yield very little. And if we don't have reliable partners on the ground, we must be prepared to correct course, and it must be U.S. policy that law enforcement matters must be dealt with by law enforcement authorities. So this brings me to a sort of inside baseball matter, but one I think needs to be addressed. The face of U.S. policy towards Honduras at this moment is effectively the State Department's INL Bureau, sometimes called the Drugs and Thugs Bureau. I have no beef with that bureau, its personnel, or its mission. I think the mission is good. But given the context, I don't believe it's enough. Even worse is a danger of slipping into a policy autopilot driven by the fact of a preponderance of big-ticket security programs. I believe that the Department of State's Western Hemisphere Affairs Bureau, which has the bigger policy equities as its charge, should clearly and openly have its hand on this policy helm. Better still, I am heartened by the renewed focus on the Americas coming out of the White House and led by Vice President Biden. I've been invited to the White House to meet with Vice President Biden and a small group to talk about Latin American policy. It comes as an important time for the region as a whole and for Central America. Vice President Biden's involvement brings the kind of big-picture reassessment that I think we need right now. Since I've picked on almost everybody except the U.S. Congress, let me do that now. During the last Salvadoran elections, some of my colleagues across the aisle in the Congress stated publicly that a vote for candidate Funes would bring all different terrible consequences, including jeopardizing remittances and even TSP for Salvadorans. The statements received widespread coverage in Salvadoran newspapers opposed to Funes. Obviously, the statements were politically motivated, and I'm picturing President Funes holding up a newspaper like Harry Truman did in 1948, where it said Dewey beats Truman, like headline. I want to say what I said before. I don't think the United States, members of Congress, or anyone else should meddle in taking sides in Central American elections. As a point of comparison, I suspect these same members know that taking sides in, say, Mexican elections would unleash all manner of hellfire and fury from the Mexican government, press, and people, and our State Department officials would be left to clean up the mess. It's disturbing to me that Central America receives a very different treatment. And that said, I don't think these statements will stop, but I think that they really should. I think we should respect the rights of the people of these countries to elect the governments that they deserve and want without pressure from members of Congress telling people who to vote for. So this brings me to offer two thoughts, one to the State Department and another to Salvadoran and Honduran voters. To the State Department, it's imperative that the State Department shows by words and deeds that the U.S. is relentlessly neutral in these elections. It is not enough for us to say we are not involved. We have to overcome a few things. One is the unfortunate baggage left by some past U.S. administrations that have historically been nakedly partisan in Central America policies. Two, there have been persistent entreaties for support from segments of Central American society. And yes, as I mentioned before, sometimes significant pressure from Congress to take sides. It's easier likely to say this than do this, but by words and deeds, the burden is on us to actually persuade our Central American friends that we don't have a finger on the electoral scale and that we will work with whoever is elected. The historical context calls for nothing less. So let me conclude by saying to voters in Honduras and El Salvador, I say this. As you have in the past, you may well hear lots of voices telling you about dire consequences for U.S. policy if you cast your votes one way or another. My word is, don't believe it. Your vote is your own, and it falls on you to choose your leaders. We will work with your choice. We are happy that there is democracy, and we will work with whomever the people elect. Count on me to do everything I can to make that a reality, and I want to thank you again to the Council of the Americas for hosting this event. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Engel, for those terrific comments. And as promised, thought-provoking, at times entertaining, but certainly well-informed as we knew that they would be as well. Thank you. And I want to pick up on precisely where you left the conversation, because I think that's the right point, and explore what happens. Let's keep the focus on Honduras for a minute and explore what happens the day after the election on May 25th, November 25th. Without reference to necessarily who the victor is. But it could be a close election. We know that there are going to be some complications in terms of quick counts and voting results and things just because of the geography of the country and various things like this, as well as you referred as well to perhaps a lack of confidence in government institutions. What can the international community do in that environment to support democracy in Honduras? And is it something that the United States can and should be thinking of doing by ourselves, or is there a larger group of friends? Or help us think through that scenario just a little bit.
Well, I think because of the past involvement that the U.S. has had with many of these countries, and because the U.S. is looked up to as sort of a big brother. I mean, we are the wealthiest nation in the hemisphere, and we have been involved in the hemisphere for many years. I think people will generally look to us, and that's why I wanted to make the point that we should not be partisan in terms of pushing one side or another in any country other than our own, because people are quite capable of deciding who they want to elect. What I would like to see is free and fair elections, and that any way that that can be achieved, I think the United States has to play a role. So I believe that it would be helpful to congratulate the winners of the elections, and for the president to send a clear message that we are prepared to work with the leaders, the new leaders, on a basis of mutual respect. And I think that mutual respect, Eric, is very, very important, because when I traveled around Central America and South America and the Caribbean, people were very eager to work with us. They sort of looked to us, but people are not eager to work with you if they think that you don't accord them the respect that they deserve. And I think that may have been one of the bad old things of American policy 50, 60 years ago. Hopefully we have shed that and now extend a hand. So I think anything that the countries would need in terms of helping with the election, monitoring the election, we should do it obviously in conjunction with the OAS, with other countries. I think all of that.
Is there an appetite in Congress for maybe not specifically targeted for Honduras, but maybe more broadly with Central America for greater assistance? We know obviously there's a budget issue nationally in our own country. We're certainly aware of that. But given the significance of the issues, is that something that people are would even consider, or is that something that's just not on the table and we have to look for other tools to support democracy?
Well, I always believe nothing's on the table unless you put it on the table.
Yeah,
and I think there are those of us that feel our relationship with Central America is so important that we will put on the table. As you know, of course, the big talk now, the big controversy now is immigration reform. And immigration reform obviously directly affects Central America. The Senate's obviously passed its version of the bill. The House hasn't yet done it. I think that Central America is in focus because of immigration reform. And again, I think you have, as I mentioned before, immigration linked with U.S. relations with these countries. You know, 50 years ago, when you talk about Honduras or El Salvador, there were very few Hondurans or Salvadorians living in the United States. Now there are many. That helps create bonds and ties between our two countries. I look at that as a plus, not a negative thing. It's a plus thing. And so I think it gives us a greater opportunity to be friends and to have greater ties. So I think that while we should get involved, we shouldn't get involved in, as I mentioned, in telling people who to vote for, but getting involved in helping with democracy building and the things that are so important for the stability of these countries.
Mm-hmm. Let me shift the focus just a little bit, if I can, from the economic side to the security side. And you referenced some of these issues as well, and they don't just impact Honduras or Salvador, but indeed the entire isthmus, and you referred, I think, quite appropriately to the geographic position that Central America occupies between the drug-producing nations and the world's largest drug consumer, which is us. That dynamic may not change anytime soon, or if it does, it may be at the margins. Is there something, obviously I don't have an answer here, and smarter minds than mine certainly have looked at this and come up, with essentially the same non-answer, but what can the United States as a friend do with the region to help with this dynamic? There is concern, as you expressed in terms of Congress, about some of the military aspects. There isn't a lot of capacity necessarily on the police side or on some of the other sides, so there aren't a lot of other tools. Help us think through how, as a friend, the United States can work with the Central American nations as partners and try to work through this together. It's been an issue that continues to vex us and is directly contributing to some of the issues you spoke about.
You mean drugs?
Well, drugs and the personal insecurity that stems from that, yes.
Well, you may remember when I was chair, we passed a bill out of the House. Unfortunately, it did not pass the Senate, which would reassess U.S. drug policy in the region. I've often said for many years that we obviously bear the responsibility, and you said it, since we are the largest drug-consuming nation. And if there was not a market for drugs, you wouldn't have drugs and crime and all the terrible things that are associated with it. I remember speaking with the president of Panama, who said to me that Panama never had this problem before, and all of a sudden, because of where it's located geographically, it has a real problem with these gangs and these people who are literally making billions of dollars over people's misery. So I think that we don't have the luxury of, again, trying to wall ourselves off. It's really a situation, I think, that if we didn't consume the drugs, we wouldn't have as many customers. And so I think that it's not only getting at the drug people or arresting people who have illicit drugs, it's trying to stop people or counsel people or wean people off of using drugs. And we don't do that enough. I think that we should be doing more of that. Again, if the drugs weren't consumed, it's like I used to use the term a balloon. Right. You poke it and you kind of get at where the drugs are coming in from, and then it just moves someplace else. But it comes in because the desire is there and the market is there. So I just think that we need to do a lot in this problem in this country with the problem of drugs to try to wean people off of drug habit.
One of the things, precisely with the balloon analogy, we've been seeing as some of the programs that are beginning to bite in Central America against drugs are working, you're starting to see some of the traffickers return to the Caribbean basin actually as a more permissive environment, if you want to put it that way. And that's particularly worrisome. It's not that people are unaware of that, but there are only so many resources in the world to be able to address some very difficult issues. I have a lot of additional questions. I would love to have the opportunity to continue speaking with Congressman Engel personally, but we also want to bring all of you into the conversation as well, and so we'll give you the opportunity now for some questions. We have circulating microphones, and if you could please identify yourself by name, and if you're representing an organization, please identify yourself by that. We'll go first here to the ambassador in the front row, and then we'll come back here. Why don't we take a couple questions at once as a round, Mr. Engel, and then ask you to respond. Yeah.
Sure.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Congressman. My name is Don Planty. We met many years ago on a trip to Brazil, Argentina, and Chile. Congratulations on your work and for your remarks this afternoon. Nice to see you again. I'd like to ask off Eric's last question on security. And those of us who've been in the region, worked there a long time, it's no secret that now for 20 years now, a big part of the problem, underlying problem, is the weak institutions. You alluded to it in your remarks. And my question is, why hasn't the U.S. government been able to do more than, a program here, or patchwork here, anti-drugs here? All we've done across administrations, Republican and Democratic, why we've not been able to really focus on institutional reform and put money into helping the Central Americans especially develop their institutions, the police, the court system across the rule of law sector. I was in Honduras recently and had lunch with the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. He was kind enough to invite me for lunch. I've known him a long time. And I told him I just finished a project in Afghanistan where we trained a special security force to protect the judicial sector. They'd never had it. He said, you know, I need that desperately here. My judges are intimidated, they're threatened, they're killed, their families are threatened, they don't dare issue the right verdict. And we've never been able to, it seems to me, design and implement programs to really strengthen the institutions. It's all been dealing with symptoms. And it's the 11th hour. We really need to. It's not too late, but we really need to get busy on that front, it seems to me.
Thank you very much. We'll go here, and then we'll take a second round after we are able to address some of these. We have a question right up here. Sure. Oh, we have Mike.
Thank you. My name is Jose Cardenas, consultant here in Washington. I wanted to also add my deep appreciation, Congressman, for your leadership over the years on Western Hemisphere issues. You provided some very sound advice about U.S. officials perhaps making intemperate statements leading into the upcoming elections in the region. In that context, for example, yesterday, former President Lula of Brazil videotaped a very explicit endorsement of one of the candidates in the Honduran election, Xiomara Castro. In El Salvador, we also know that the Venezuelan government, through its agreement with the government of El Salvador, through Alba Petróleos, that millions of dollars of resources go right into the hands of the FMLN. Are those some of the also interventions that you think are unhelpful as we proceed forward?
And then we'll go right back here, please, to the gentleman here.
Hi, thank you. Danny Freifeld. I run an investment fund in Washington. What is the level of concern in Venezuela for, frankly, state collapse, whether it's through economic default or sustained levels of civil violence? And with one election coming up between now and earliest 2015 for any opportunity for a referendum, what's the level of concern in Washington or in your office that we're not going to get to 2015 on a sort of regularized calendar? Thank you.
So we have Central American institutions, outside intervention, and shifting the focus to Venezuela, if you care to bring that into the conversation.
Okay, I'll try to keep these all in,
yes,
all in mind. I think building institutions is probably the most important thing that we can help with doing. I think that, I remember the concerns I had in some of my conversations about Mexico, and potentially people always talk about some terrorists can slip into the Guatemala-Mexican border and get into Mexico and potentially do harm in the United States. And I remember having this whole discussion about the institutions in Guatemala. They weren't as strong as the institutions in Mexico, and so it really posed a real problem. I think that's probably where we could help the most to multiple countries by trying to strengthen their institutions. Unfortunately, because of our budgetary problems and because of the mode that we're in, I don't see much eagerness for people wanting to get involved. In fact, quite the opposite. We saw this, those who are as old as I am remember right after the Vietnam War, where America turned inward and really just didn't want to participate or do as much internationally, and said we had a lot of things to do back home. And unfortunately, I'm starting to see rumblings of that again in some quarters, where people feel, we have a limited amount of money, we can't balance our budget, we are shutting down the government, we're having all kinds of fights, and now's not the time to send money to foreign countries. I think it's quite the opposite, actually. I think that we don't live in a bubble, and strengthening the institutions of these countries are very important.
I think that must be a telephone.
Yeah, I was wondering.
Exactly.
I thought I had somebody out there telling me enough. Cut it, cut it, cut it. You made your point. Interventions. You know, I think it's almost like the institutions. We should be building up institutions and have less interventions. If institutions are built up, there'd be less of a need for interventions. You know, we can't stop people from other countries, leaders of other countries or former leaders, from endorsing candidates in different countries, but I think we can try to stop it in our own country. And while we're all free to say what we want and who there is, I have always felt as an American congressman, I've never endorsed a candidate in any country other than the United States, because I just didn't feel that that's my role. My role as an American congressman on the Foreign Affairs Committee is to work with and deal with any duly elected people who are elected by the voters of those countries. And I think that, you know, again, if the institutions were better, we would have a need for less interventions. But I don't think that we should be pushing candidates one way or another. I mean, there's a lot of negativity about it. First of all, if you are one of the candidates that won, even though you think people in the United States weren't supporting you, well, then you'd come to office with a negative opinion of the United States, starting off on the wrong foot. I think we need to be careful. We need to help build institutions, respect institutions, help in any way we can. But when it comes to whom the other countries elect, that's their decision, not ours. In terms of Venezuela, someone just told me that as I was coming here today, so I haven't checked it out, but you really can't make it up, that Maduro has moved up Christmas. I thought I would tweet something out. I have to think of something clever to tweet, because that's kind of a sad situation. I'm one of those who believes that Maduro did not get elected as the leader of Venezuela, because they were so quick to destroy the ballots and collect them, so that international monitoring or international counting of the ballots couldn't be done. I think human nature is, if you really feel you've legitimately won an election, you want people to count it because you want to prove that you really won the election. If you have something to hide, then you don't want it counted. I am very heartbroken about what's going on in Venezuela, because I think that country has enormous problems. I don't see it getting better, and the Venezuelan people, in my opinion, deserve a lot better than what they have.
Let's take a second round. We'll go 1 and 2, and then perhaps 3. How much time do you have? Can we extend your time?
Sure.
Okay.
Okay.
As they might say in Congress, extend and, you know.
Time flies
exactly.
when you're having fun.
Please.
Okay.
My name is Graciela Reyes. I am the former representative of Uruguay to the Organization of American States. I'm now an independent scholar. And my question is, has the media had an important role in the building up of democracy in Central America, the same way it has had it in South America? Thank you.
Very good question. And then right here.
Hi, my name is Mirta Postuma. I work for the Due Process of Law Foundation, an organization based here in DC dedicated to promoting rule of law and human rights in the hemisphere. Congressman Engel, thank you for your remarks. I think it's really refreshing to hear a more balanced, measured approach, especially talking about these countries in the region. And I think we all agree that building the institutions is the really big task ahead. And I wanted to offer a suggestion and invite your thoughts about an aspect, because I think one of the things that's probably not very helpful is to send a lot of money there and to see what we as Americans can build up. I think that's an approach that has not been very helpful, that's been tried over and over again. And I think one of a more strategic approach could be to try and strengthen institutions by means of better procedures to integrate those institutions in order to get the right people leading those. So not proposing candidates, but to make sure that there are better selection mechanisms and that institutions can be strengthened from the bottom up.
Thank you very much. And number 3, the gentleman in the uniform, please.
Good afternoon, Congressman. Captain Peter Trotzen, U.S. Coast Guard, and I'm actually the Coast Guard's liaison to the Office of Secretary of Defense. So it's kind of a strange place for a Coast Guard person to be.
We'll accept you anyway. You're good.
Thank you, sir. Institutions seem to be a popular topic, and my question to you is, in conversations with a few Colombian officials, with the reconciliation, if you will, with the FARC on the horizon, or seemingly on the horizon. As they look ahead, they offer that perhaps Colombia can play a role in strengthening Honduras' institutions, that they have perhaps some spare capacity to do this. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on third countries being involved and our support of perhaps third countries in that role.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point. So we have the press, we have quality of leadership and ability to help on that sector, and then third countries who may be able to be of assistance broadly.
Well, in terms of the media, I'm not sure, was the question, should the countries get involved with the media, or should the media get involved?
Has the media played a responsible role in, yep.
Is play in Central America. It was important in Latin America, in our southern hemisphere, in the way, in the
Right.
democratic governance. I want to know in Central America how.
Well, I think the media plays an important role. I think the media has played an important role and can play an even more important role in the future. I think what the media does is it shines light on the problems. If the media is allowed to be a independent media, if the media becomes a state-controlled media where they only bring one side of the story, that it's unhelpful. But if the media reports the way we think media does in the United States, both sides of the issue, then I think it's helpful. And I think that there could be strengthened ties between U.S. media and media in Central America. I think that you know, all of us that run for office get annoyed sometimes at the media because we feel that they don't portray something fairly or don't say something about us that's fairly, but they actually do a very good job, the media here. And I'd like to see a more independent media in some of the Central American countries like we have in the United States.
Quality of leadership and things that we can do to bolster that in Central
Yeah,
American
well, I
countries.
think you're right when you say that we just can't throw money. You know, one of the things that people don't realize is, many people don't realize, is the U.S., and I realize this because I'm one of the conferees on the Farm Bill, we give more food aid all over the world than any other country, and many times I don't even think people realize that it's coming from the United States. So I think there's all kinds of humanitarian aid that we can still do. I think our NGOs do a fantastic job in terms of building up the society and various aspects of the society. And I think it's important to continue to get involved with that. But I think your suggestions are obviously fine. It's not a matter of just throwing good money after bad. It's a matter of trying to figure out how we can best be helpful, and moving along those ties. It's people-to-people ties, you know. But again, we suffer from the problems of having a large deficit, and a lot of the programs that I would like to see, or that people in this room would like to see, we don't have the money for, and it's a constant struggle for those of us that are activists in this regard. Feel that we need to keep pushing getting the money. So it's not a matter of throwing, you know, good money after bad. It's a matter of finding the money and finding the right places where it can be of maximum benefit. Well, you know, we obviously cannot. I'm very bullish on Colombia. I have been, because that was a country that not too long ago was on the verge of being a failed state. And when you look at what they have done, they've asked everything we've asked them to do, they've done. And sure, we've given them a lot of money, a lot of assistance, but it has not been poured down a hole. It's been really utilized. I mean, I have been to Colombia numerous times, and I remember walking in the streets of Medellin and places where you couldn't even walk just a year before, and it was just amazing to see that. And even where you have, you know, President Santos elected initially with the support of President Uribe, and now they've sort of parted ways, and Uribe is actively supporting somebody else. In a way, that kind of shows that how the democracy has been strengthened in Colombia, where people where they have free and fair elections. And I have believed that United States policy, to a very large degree, should be used in a geopolitical way, that countries who work with us, we have an obligation to work with them and to help them and support them. It was one of the reasons I supported the free trade agreement with Colombia. I felt that they had just worked with us, and it was basically a miracle what happened there. So, you know, I don't question what their government does if they want to try to have a rapprochement with the FARC or others. I don't think the United States should tell them what to do. I think they basically know what to do. And if they want to give aid to Honduras or help Honduras, that's between the Colombians and Hondurans. I don't think the United States needs to get involved.
Let's take one additional, perhaps final round of questions based on the Congressman's time. We'll go 1 and 2, and then all the way back here, I think we'll 3. We'll probably do it. Again, if you could identify yourself, please, by name and organization.
My name is Salvador Cortez. I'm not sure if I don't keep myself here. I just want to ask the Congressman, first of all, congratulate you for the ideas and the thoughts that you actually expressed to us. Very refreshing, and my God, when you see these things that come out of the Congress, sometimes you begin doubting our own system here in the United States. It's traditional is actually that the U.S., as you mentioned, you actually made recollection of that. The fact that people, empowered officers, either the government or the Congress, actually begin or play in these dirty wars, trying to assassinate the characters of whoever is the opponent. Last week, actually, it happened from no less than the head of the Committee on Foreign Affairs of the House and the ranking, unfortunately. I think that it was sort of like something, I don't want to through any comments on that, but what I was actually to ask you in terms of policy, would it be possible, since you mentioned the role that Vice President Biden actually plays in this, to see if it were possible to actually reassure the Salvadorians in the country that actually the United States policy is a policy, as you put it, a neutral policy in principle, and the United States would respect the winner of the elections. Since, as you put it, they are monitored, and we continue actually seeing and hoping that more institutions, respectable institutions, actually monitor El Salvador.
Thank you.
Freedom House,
if you could pass the microphone, please, to the gentleman
Thank
here.
you very much.
Yes, thank you for the question. There we go. Thanks.
Hello, my name is Rich Martinelli with PepsiCo. I'm sure you're familiar with the recent fiscal reforms set to take effect in Mexico. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on how enactment of these reforms will influence leaders in Central American countries.
Which reforms are you referring to?
The fiscal reforms, the wide-ranging tax reform.
And then there is a question over here. If you could raise your hand again. There we go.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Catherine Craigie, and I'm with the Americas program at CSIS. I had a question about what you think the results will be for the election in Honduras, regardless of what's best for American policy. Especially because historically 2 parties have kind of passed the government back and forth between them. What do you think the results will be if a 3rd party takes the presidency?
You know, these are some really interesting questions, and I think we've also incorporated Colombia, Venezuela, and Mexico into Central America too. So I think we've got a broader perspective, but I say that in a good way because frankly, you can't anymore just talk about Central America in isolation. It is part of a broader community, and I think so these are important questions. Take them, Congressman, in whatever order you care to do.
Yeah, the first question, I wasn't sure what the exact question was.
My question was, Congressman, that if you could actually deliver or comment your ideas about the neutrality the United States has to play in the elections in El Salvador. And the problem is that in El Salvador, they don't understand how the system works. So if it is a congressman that makes a statement, negative normally or positive, whatever,
that is going to be the official policy of the United States as understood back then. So that's my point. So if somebody like the Vice President or the President or the Secretary of State could make a statement in that line, the neutrality of the United States policy in the El Salvador elections, and would be, as you put it before, actually deal with deal with whoever is elected.
Well, I was very happy when Vice President Biden asked me to come to the White House for this meeting, because this was not something that I asked to come to. He invited me, and I was unsure when I went there exactly who would be there. And it was a small group of Congress members and senators on both parties that were there. And I was very happy that the focus was on Latin America and the Caribbean, because I think it's just so important, as I mentioned in my remarks. I think the days, if there is a bad taste in people's mouths in the rest of the hemisphere against the United States, it stems back to the days when we were actively working with groups in one country or another to plan coups or to try to influence one side or another. And I think those days are gone, and rightfully so. And I think that we make a mistake if we think that we can sort of go back to those bad old days. Now, it doesn't mean that we don't want governments in these different countries that will work with us. But I think that, for me, it would be more important to establish the institutions in those countries so that the people could elect whomever they want, and as a result, whoever they elected would work with us. If you are running in a country and you have the feeling that the United States was actively supporting your opponent and you happen to win, well, what would that do for the way you'd govern towards the United States once you were in office? You'd obviously have an antagonism, and it would start relations off on the wrong foot. So that's why I'm saying that I think it's better for us to offer the kinds of technical assistance, to offer the kinds of democracy building, offer the kinds of help that we can give, rather than taking sides in elections in different countries. The fiscal reforms in Mexico, Mexico is such an important country to the United States. Obviously, we share a long border. We have immigration questions, and Mexico getting its fiscal house in order is very, very important to us. I was a big supporter of the Merit Initiative. I thought it was very important for the United States to help with that. No one really talks about it much anymore. It seems to have been kind of petered out, which is really a shame. But I think, again, here's an instance in terms of fiscal reform that the United States should work closely with Mexico. I mean, we're no one to talk when it comes to fiscal reform, but certainly we can be helpful, and I think that's also a way to cement good relations between our two countries. I think that Mexico, obviously, Mexico and Canada are the two countries that we share large borders with. And when you talk about immigration reform and drugs and all these other questions, along with fiscal reforms, along with the rule of law, that's something I think the United States needs to get involved. So I'm hopeful with these reforms, and I'm hopeful that we will continue to work with the Mexican government to see them through. In terms of Honduras...
Do you want to predict the election results?
No, I'm notorious.
I think that's what she's asking you to do.
Bad at predicting results. I've just said 4 times here that I don't think we should get involved. And if I predict that one person's going to win, it might be seen as my wanting that person to win. The point I wanted to make before was that because there are more than 2 candidates, person that wins may get 35% of the vote, and what kind of a mandate would that person be perceived to have? That's what I worry about mostly there, rather than who will win. I think if it's a free and fair election, that'll take care of itself. I just worry, you want someone to have a mandate and to be able to rule strongly, and if they're a real minority government, they may be looked upon as being weak and not have the authority to govern strongly. That's my worry in Honduras.
But this goes to the day after the election question too. And now with three viable parties who are presumably all going to achieve some percentage of the vote, that, from a political science perspective anyway, that complicates decision making in the country. With three parties now instead of two, and if you've got a country that faces some fiscal problems, faces security problems, may have some issues in terms of the conduct of the elections, I mean, that just complicates the issues further.
Right.
Something to be a little bit.
And I think the United States getting involved in
Yeah.
something like that has a negative connotation. I mean, you go back several years when Ortega was elected. During the previous administration, we got involved in a third candidate, and as a result, Ortega won with, I forget what it was, 38% of the vote, and it's largely thought that if there were only two candidates, he would have lost the election. So sometimes when we get involved in an attempt to influence things one way or another, it doesn't exactly go the way we had thought it would go or hoped it would go. That's why I think it's best that we just leave the elections to the people of those countries and try to give them any kind of assistance that we can give them in terms of conducting fair and free elections.
I think it's rare in Washington that you get a congressman of such gravitas and senior standing to come and willingly put himself in front of any question that's asked. That is leadership, Congressman, and we really appreciate it. I know that you've given us a lot to chew on here, me personally, and I trust I'm speaking for everybody else. Very informed comments. I trust that not everybody agreed with everything. That's a good thing. That makes us think, and speaking on behalf of the Council, we are delighted that you chose to come back, use this forum to present your message, and we hope that you'll come back at any time of your choosing. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I ask that you would please join me in thanking Congressman Eliot Engel for his terrific comments.
Thank you.